Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here, welcoming you to the worship of Community of Grace online. So glad to have you with us today. And hey, if you're watching and want to just give us a shout out, please do on Facebook, YouTube. You can write in some comments. You can tell us where you're watching from. If we can pray for you, you can put in a prayer request. And today we're continuing a series we've been doing for a few weeks. How can I get my life back? And as we ask that question, we got a little zone for you, a little zone chart to look at. Where are you in this zone chart? Are you in the blue zone? Are you in the happy zone? Are you in the yellow zone or the red zone? Well, today we're going to focus on those of you who are in the yellow zone, and that's a lot of us, including me. I found myself in the yellow zone not too long ago. It was, I think, the last week of May. And it was a weekend, Sunday morning coming around. So I'm in bed, sound asleep, and at 2 in the morning, I started experiencing heart palpitations. Not a racing heart, but heart palpitations where my heartbeat was a bit irregular. Now, I've had this experience before in my life. Of course, every time I see Jenn, I get heart palpitations. But I also had heart palpitations from time to time in my life. Always kind of knew what they were, never really afraid of them. But I never had them wake me up at night. So I got up, moved to another room so that I wouldn't disturb Jan. And the more my heart was palpitating, the more frustrated I became. The more frustrated I became, the more my heart palpitated. And it took me a couple hours to finally fall back to sleep. And then it happened the next night. Same time. And then it happened the next night. Same time. And almost every night for 4 weeks, about 2 in the morning, those heart palpitations would wake me up. Now, I knew enough about anxiety because I'd been through some anxiety challenges in my life. I knew my body was telling me something. And what it was telling me was this. I thought I was dealing okay with Jan going through chemo. I thought I was okay leading us as a church through COVID into this new thing, whatever it's going to be. But apparently I wasn't doing as well as I thought. And so my body was telling me I was in the yellow zone. I was anxious. And so I needed to do those things to help me manage my anxiety again, which I was able to do. And that included getting back to my daily meditation time. I talked to a therapist for a couple sessions just to get my life back in balance, and then it took care of itself. Now, all of us as human beings have moments of anxiety. The problem is that many of us today are living 24/7 relentless anxiety. Now, anxiety is actually something that can be good for us. When we are faced with something that seems to be out of control or faced with something that could put us in danger, our bodies instinctively go into fight or flight mode. They go into anxiety mode. And so what happens is our breathing deepens, and that sends oxygen up to the brain so that we can make some quick decisions. And it fills us with adrenaline so that we can either fight or flee. Now again, if you're facing a saber-toothed tiger, that anxiety, that's going to save your life. The problem for us in the 21st century is it feels like we're facing saber-toothed tigers every moment of every day. And that burst of adrenaline, that fight or flight, living with us all the time, is wearing us out. As one person put it, we are 80%, as human beings, we are 80% water, which means we're cucumbers with anxiety. I actually have no idea what that means, but I thought it was funny. Someone else said, why is it we're anxious all the time? Because basically, we're walking nervous systems. And a lot of that is true. So every one of us deals with anxiety. And what anxiety is like worry. It's like stress, but it's stress on overload. And it can overwhelm us. And so what I want to talk about today for just a few moments are some of the things that can trigger anxiety in us. And then talk a little bit about what God has to say about it in our lives. So one of the things that triggers anxiety in us, and this ongoing anxiety, is something we talked about a few weeks ago, and that's the sense of being overwhelmed. And we spent a good deal of time of that a few weeks ago, but there are so many things in life right now that just seem out of control. The world seems out of control. For some of us, our personal lives seem out of control. And certainly if you watch the news for a minute or two, you get the sense the world is out of control. And when things feel out of control, when we're overwhelmed, we get stressed. And if you live in a constant world of being overwhelmed, You're constantly anxious. And again, that's just not good for us. A second thing that can trigger anxiety in us is what-if thinking. And by that I mean negative what-if thinking. What-if thinking is living our lives all the time assuming something bad is going to happen. What if I don't get this job? What if I don't get this raise? What if she doesn't love me anymore? What if the Seahawks win the division? Negative thinking is living in such a way that you're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. You're constantly living in fear. It may or may not happen, but you're living just in case it does. And that leads to the third thing that can cause anxiety in us, and that's catastrophizing. And so what catastrophizing does is it takes what-if thinking to its apocalyptic conclusion, end of the world scenario. And catastrophizing always uses, notice I use the word always uses words like always, everyone, everything, no one, nobody. So everything is bad. Nothing works in my life. Nobody loves me. I can't be good at anything. I'm always a failure. And so we catastrophize everything. We'll take one little part of our lives, and that will speak for everything. So it takes what-if thinking and turns it into apocalyptic thinking, end of the world kind of stuff. This is horrible. Worst thing that could happen to me. And that just continually makes us anxious. So those are some of the things that cause anxiety. And FDR one time said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And people with anxiety will say, well, that's exactly right. Because in the end, what happens with out-of-control anxiety is we end up fearing fear. We're so afraid that something's going to make us afraid that we're afraid of the fear that might be coming, and oftentimes doesn't. And so we just get caught up in this vicious cycle of anxiety because there's so many things around us that can produce anxiety in us. Now, when I had to start dealing with anxiety in my own life, and I was having panic attacks for a while, an anxiety disorder, this was back in the 80s, I found that sermons on anxiety produced more anxiety in me. Because well-meaning preachers would get up and they would quote these really great Bible verses, peace be with you, don't worry about anything, don't be anxious, trust God more. And those verses just made me feel worse. Because I felt like there was nothing I could do about this anxiety. It seemed to be happening to me. I learned differently later, but it seemed to be happening to me. And so here you have this pastor saying, Jesus says you shouldn't worry. And if you're worrying, it's because you don't trust God enough. So now I'm anxious. And now I'm even more anxious because now I'm not trusting God enough, which just makes me even more anxiouser. And again, just this vicious cycle. So I want to share with you as we wrap up the message 2 things that I've learned over these years, 30-some years of dealing with anxiety on and off. The first is this. You can learn to manage your anxiety. Because anxiety isn't something that happens to you, it's the way that you think. For the overwhelming majority of us who struggle with ongoing anxiety, it's the way that we think. It's the patterns of thinking we've developed. And if we can change our patterns, if we can get out of what-if thinking, if we can get out of catastrophizing, and then learn the skills that calm us down, we can learn to live, maybe not anxiety-free, but we can learn to manage it. And so this week, on Monday, on Facebook, I will post some resources for you that have been helpful for me, just to get you started. And I'll put it in our e-grace for Thursday as well, so that you have some resources to get you started if you're struggling with anxiety. But the second thing I learned is this, and this is most pertinent to the message today. Peace and the promise of peace is not a club to make us feel worse. Peace is not a demand. Peace is a gift. Peace is the gift that no matter how anxious you are right now, you're not alone. That God's grace surrounds you. In the midst of your anxiety, the Prince of Peace is with you. You may not always feel peaceful, but in the midst of the anxiety, the promise of peace is that Jesus, the Christ, the Prince of Peace, is there with you, and he's there with you right now. So a couple of weeks ago, we spent a few minutes practicing awe to help us deal with being overwhelmed. And then we practiced contentment to help us deal with this growing sense of unhappiness. And today we're going to practice peace. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just a deep breath into your chest, fill your chest up, fill your abdomen up, and then just slowly let it out. Take another deep breath in, and this time as you let it out, just drop your shoulders, drop your face, sink into your chair, and be still and know that the Prince of Peace is with you right now.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. In all my days, I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God.
In Mark chapter 10, Jesus' disciples find themselves caught in the midst of a storm on the Sea of Galilee. Now, these are experienced fishermen. They knew the moods of the Sea of Galilee. They knew that sea like the back of their hands. But this storm was different. This storm had them in fight or flight mode. They thought they were going to die. And then, walking into the storm, walking on the waves of anxiety and fear and stress, came Jesus. And he said, "Peace, because I'm here for you." And so Jesus comes to you today on the waves of your anxiety, the waves of your worry, your discontent. And he says, I've got you. I've got your back. So don't be afraid. Peace be with you.